Hello everyone, this is an intro. So the video that is about to play was recorded about a week ago, I guess, and upon editing it yesterday I discovered that I had somehow forgotten to film the first part or lost the footage at some point. I don't know which, could have been both, I don't know. So I reshot the first bit, but obviously it's impossible to reshoot some parts of a video when you've already shot the rest of it. So the video that follows is a little bit, it's less than I wanted it to be. You might note there's also a fair bit of editing, and I just wanted to explain that that isn't me frigging what you're looking at. That is editing for coughing and such, because I'm continuing to suffer from the after effects of COVID even now. So that's why it might appear a little jumpy in places. But yes, it isn't really up to the standard I wanted it to be, and I'll apologise for that. But I wanted to post it anyway because I think, well, I put a lot of work into it, truthfully, but also it's probably still of use to some people. So, but yeah, one of the things with this channel, with what I do, is it isn't as professional as some of the channels on YouTube. It's not as highly produced or excellent looking, but the reason for that, or a lot of the reason for that, apart from my legendary biffery with technology, is that it's live. What I do here, I film it and I talk about it as I do it, or just after I've done it. So if it goes wrong, I can't really do it again. So anyway, there you go, caveat done. I'll leave you to watch the rest of the video if you can wade through it. Hello and welcome back to Genesis Designs and Modelcraft Bench, and today we're going to look at these paints from AK Interactive. So a little review. First time I've done a paint review, so forgive me if it's a bit pants, but we'll see how it goes. So this is the 3rd gen acrylics from AK Interactive. So, I mean, we all use acrylics, right? With Tamiya, say? That's acrylic, isn't it? Gunze, Hobby Colour, Aqueous, acrylic. Oh yes, they both are, but they're not the same as these. These acrylics are the type which we're perhaps more used to seeing like this. You've got Vallejo and Amov Mig there, and they're the pure sort of water-based acrylics that you thin with water. Now I don't really use these. I do have a few, obviously, and I mostly use them for brush painting small details now and again. I don't use them for spraying. I have done in the past, of course, but I find spraying them to be a nose. They are difficult to clean out of the airbrush. They tend to clog the tip, and I've always found that the fragility of the finish when you've got them on the model to be terrible. Incredibly fragile and very, very, very difficult to continue working on the model. This might be a failing for me, because I certainly see plenty of models out there where people have used these things and they've gotten very well and they've got great results. But for me, I don't use these for spraying. Haven't done in a long time. So I thought it would be interesting to have a look at these new 3rd gen ones. There's some bold claims on the packaging about how good they are compared to the previous ones, and I thought it would only be fair to get the appropriate branded thinner to go with them. So having done a sniff test on this, I mean, I'm not a chemist, and obviously my ability to smell things is somewhat reduced at the moment, but still, sniff tests suggest that this is essentially IPA with potentially some water and maybe some retarding agent in there as well. There's certainly nothing very spectacular, but I used the right stuff just to be fair, really. So this package, I got this from Models for Sale, www.modelsforsale.com. He does have a really quite huge range of both AK and Ammo of MIG products, and I bought the set because this is going to form part of the next giveaway on the channel. This set was just under £19 and you get 8 paints, so not the cheapest, just over £2 a bottle. So this is the Imperial Japanese Army Air Force set to go with the model that's getting given away. These are the colours you get within. I will not try to speak Japanese on here, but they are grey green, grey indigo, olive brown, green, blue green, yellow green, dry grass and tea colour. Many different versions of green essentially. And on the back there's a few sort of suggestions, quite handsome artwork with a few suggestions for where you might use some of those colours. And this is what you get inside, just a cheap flimsy plastic tray. I don't suppose for a second that they're supposed to be stored in these particularly. And then your bottles. And initially they do look quite different because they've got this much chunkier top. But once you take the top off, they're the same bottles really, pretty much, the little dropper bottles. There are no agitating balls in these bottles, they are just shake and go. I have found in the past with this sort of paint, over time they will settle, and shaking alone and even an agitated ball won't get them to mix back up. But you can remove this spout and stick a stirring stick in there in that case, and you to remove these spouts you just grab hold of it, give it a wiggle and pull it out. So initially then I'm going to spray some of the paint on a test piece. I've got a Rebel 109 wing, a few actually, but it's been carefully prepped. By carefully I mean it's cleaned with IPA, it's cleaned with Mr. Colour Thinner, but it's not sanded. So this is representative of a kit, bare plastic, Bosch, get it straight on there, and you know, get some colours on there. And I've got another part which has got some Mr. Paint on it already, and I'm going to use that in lieu of a primed surface. The airbrush that I'll use throughout is my trusty Iwata Revolution CR. This is a 0.5 needle in here, so it's relatively large. I think probably most people are using a 0.3 airbrush for a lot of their work, but I do use the Revolution for nearly everything, so again it's representative of my typical setup. And for the initial paint test I'll spare you the boredom of mixing up the paint and actually spraying it on, but I'm going to use the proprietary thinner around about a 50-50 ratio. We'll get some paint on these parts and then I'll come back to you and see what it looks like. And while those are drying off for a few minutes, I'm just going to do a few little experiments with the different thinners. Now the way I do this is to not use the airbrush, because if it doesn't, these paints have a propensity to turn into gloop if you put the wrong thinners in them, and I don't want to gloop up my hairbrush, so again learnt that the hard way. So I use these palettes. So here I've got pure IPA, which my IPA is 99.9% pure medical grade good stuff. The third gen acrylic thinner, Mr. Colour. This is a 50-50 mixture of rapid and levelling because I didn't have any standard at the time, and water. So take your paint and put a little drop in, like so, and then introduce your thinner and see what happens. Shall I just zoom in a little bit just for this? So this is the proprietary. Add a few drops. Pure IPA. Mr. Colour. Remember which order these are in. And water. Right. Straight away you can see that the water has immediately begun to break the paint up, but none of the others have. So mixy mixy. Now we know this works because we just did it in the airbrush. No problem. IPA only. See how that's stringing? Clumping? Separating even? Now if I agitate it and force it, it does mix, but I don't know if you can tell by looking, but I can. It's almost thicker than it was before the thinner was added. So it does combine eventually, but not easily. And it's not washing out of the paintbrush in the water like it did with the proprietary thinner. So there's obviously something else in there other than alcohol. Right, water, no problem. Actually incorporates even more easily than the blended thinner. Biggest issue with just using water is surface tension and the fact that it doesn't want to stick. That's not too bad. Finally, Mr. Colour. Let's see. That's a hard no. And it has done exactly what I mentioned, which it has turned itself into goop. Cool. So what we've learned from that little exercise, without manking up the airbrush, and it does, as with the IPA, and I thought it might, it does incorporate with some mixing, but again it hasn't actually thinned it, it's really thick still. Now if you're wondering why on earth you would even try and thin this type of paint with Mr. Colour thinner, there you go. You have to add a lot more thinner, but you get there in the end. The reason is to make it stick and potentially make it spray a bit more easily. So you see with some coaxing it does mix and it has thinned it. So there you go. 3 different thinners, 3 different reactions. The one with that I tried to do with IPA is kind of busy separating off down here. Let's see if I can add some more and make that a little thinner. You can see how it doesn't want to combine when you add the thinners. It's actually even worse than Mr. Colour because it's going grainy. We don't like that. That's a no-no. Don't use pure IPA to thin it. Water, yes. Proprietary thinner, yes. Mr. Colour, maybe. Might spray that in a minute and see if it actually works well. Alright then, so back to the test samples. But this is the way, if you want to use different thinners in a paint, test it like this or in some similar way. You can see how the one mixed with IPA has gone all grainy, that is not combined. Emulsified might be the correct term, I'm not sure. You can see how the water has done the exact opposite, that's mixed beautifully. And the Mr. Colour is now that we've got past the gooey stage. So, just pop that to the side for a moment. Okay. So, the carefully cleaned and prepared bare plastic. Some of these paints will come off just through finger pressure alone. So far so good. That's nice. However, scratches clear off if you touch it with something harsh. I just use my fingernail. Straight off. Try and sand it. See how it just pulls off, that won't feather into that plastic surface, so when I overspray that you'll still see all those scratches. It hasn't stuck at all. The pseudo primed surface then. Again, finger pressure's not hurting it. And this time, I'm not scratching very hard, don't get me wrong. If I scratch hard enough it might come off, but no, actually, look at the difference. I'll try it on this lighter colour so it's a little bit easier to see. staying stuck. Sand it. And look how it will sand. There's all that texture from the undercoat that wasn't flatted. It's now visible. And it's feathered, it's not rolling off. So, I think that proves quite conclusively that if you're going to use these type of acrylics, you really do need to use some form of primer that will stick to the plastic properly underneath. And that if you don't, your paint is not going to stay on the model. Right then, let's see if we can get a nice camouflage edge on this stuff. We'll use this grey indigo. I'll get some of that mixed up with the standard thinner in my airbrush. See what sort of an edge we can get. So I've got the grey indigo mixed in there. It's quite thin. Still roughly around a 50-50 though. You see I've already done a line on that green area. And on the green area it doesn't look too bad, does it, in terms of a sort of a freehand edge. The airbrush setup is exactly as it was before. This is still the 0.5 needle. And I know arguably you'd say, well, you're not going to do freehand camo with a 0.5 brush, are you? And that may be true in a lot of circumstances, but in some circumstances, yes I do. So and you see I'm angling the flow of the paint away from the edge, and I mean that's pretty decent, but that's on a relatively dark colour, so let's be a bit more harsh, shall we? And we'll turn it around so that I'm trying to draw on the sky part. I think that's sky. Possibly isn't obvious on the video. If I'm even working in shot, it didn't look because I was looking at what I was doing. But I'm not that close to the part, and it's quite hard for me to maintain a steady rate of paint flow, and that is because of that little bit of tip build up that you get, which is one of the main disadvantages with using these types of paint in this way. Yeah, let's just, it's not terrible. I'm going to stress that this tip build up is not terrible, but it is present. It's absolutely isn't as bad as others that I've used in the past. So what I'm doing, I know I'm off camera, I'm cleaning that needle end. Completely. And while it's completely clean, see how it's much easier for me to hold that consistent paint flow, but you can also see that the nature of the paint is that it flows on the surface of the model even on this primed thing, and that's why you've got this dark edge here where a little tiny bit too much paint came through and it's just made that dark edge, and those can be really difficult to get rid of with following coats. Backfill this little camo area. Every now and again I'll just give it a blast of air to dry it off a touch. And as I go, I'm choosing to accent certain areas. in effect kind of pre-shading as I go along. I'm trying to build up a representative area of colour basically. There we go. That's not too bad. Not too bad at all. Not quite dry yet, but I'll come up a little closer. Now, for my money, on the green area that looks pretty decent as a sprayed edge. On the sky area not so much, it's not too bad, but it's a little bit fuzzy. And this is going to be a test now, because what I do when I use these techniques with the paints I normally use is I sand the edge just really gently, which removes some of that very light overspray, giving you a slightly, what amounts to effectively a visibly slightly harder edge. And that in this case is not going to work. As you can see, if I come up, yes, it's hardened the edge up, but it has also made marks and pulled little bits of paint off. I know it's not fully dry. I'll just clean that up a little bit. Truthfully, it's not terrible. It's a definite improvement, I think, on the previous pure acrylics that I've used. Definitely. Now, personally for me, for my sort of the way I like things to look, that is too soft of an edge. It's not, on the green it's not too bad at all, it's acceptable, but on the sky it's too soft of an edge for me. And I'm not confident that I'd be able to do any better of a job with my finer airbrush because of the nature of the paint and the way it flows. But if you're happy enough to use a sort of a blue tack style soft edge masking system, this is going to work just fine. And again, it's dry, and because it's over that substrate, it's pretty well stuck. Now, this is live and untested. Remember that paint that we mixed with Mr. Colour thinner? There it is. I sprayed it onto this bare plastic. Let's see if it's changed the properties any. It feels smoother to the touch. It took a lot longer to dry. It's just the same sort of finish sheen wise, it's pretty flat. Let's see if it scratches off. There you go. That is why you do such asinine things as try to mix Mr. Colour thinner into a pure acrylic paint, because it's now stuck. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix Mr. Colour thinner into the grey paint and see if I can get a better camouflage edge than I did on the other one. I'm hoping it's obvious from the footage that I'm able to hold a steady paint flow much more easily now. Okay, that'll do for our purposes here, I think. I did draw a line on here as well, but I think it's a much harsher test doing it over the sky, so that's why I've done that. And here's the result. And even without any titivating of that edge, you can see the difference very, very easily. It sprayed much more easily. It's easier for me to control the paint flow. It's very, very important when you're trying to do freehand camo. In fact, it's everything. And I've got a pretty reasonable edge right off the bat, as you can see. Now, if I get my little bit of sander, just don't use it wet, woman. Get a dry bit. And really, all you're doing when you're doing this is essentially just sort of tickling off the overspray, basically. So ignore the bit at the end where I've chipped it out, and this is still quite wet. That's because I used the pad, the wet part of the pad. You can't expect to sand this kind of paint, this watertight paint, with water. It just makes it come off. But there is a huge difference there in that paint edge. And there was also a very notable difference in the durability of that surface finish. So yes, it is worth trying to mix your pure acrylics with Mr. Colour, but of course I'm cognizant that does remove some of the main advantages of using them in the first place, which is the slightly less noxious odours and the toxicity levels. So it's ironic, I know, but the reason lacquer paints work is because they're lacquer paints. So alright then, so let's just come back out a bit so that I can have a fighting chance of being on camera a little bit more. Too far. Alright. So the claim on this bottle. Brand new formula, 3rd generation. This new formula beats any other acrylic paint type. It has better adaptation for both brush painting and airbrushing. At the same time, it prevents problems with paint drying in the airbrush, avoiding any clogging despite the quick drying time. Now, is that a factually correct statement? I would say broadly yes, it is. It's not better than any acrylic because I think Guns and Tamiya are still better. But this type of acrylic, yeah, it's by far the best that I've used up to now. I think I showed you that the paint was drying on the needle despite what it says there, but I've had these before with things like Vallejo where I've tried to paint them and you get a kind of a big sort of splurge on the end of the needle and it becomes impossible to paint. It just completely stops the airbrush from working at all. So it's a massive improvement on that. Would I start using these tomorrow? Probably not. However, if and when there comes the point when the fun police decide that we're not allowed to use lacquers and enamels anymore, then I feel like I could probably make these work, yes, with practice and a little bit of familiarisation in how to use them. But there you go. That is a little quick squirt review of the 3rd Gen AK acrylics. Yes, definite improvement. I think there's still a little way to go, especially in terms of durability. Probably the biggest single issue with these is you really must use a primer, and use a primer that actually sticks to the plastic, because to be honest, if you use acrylic type primers, they don't tend to stick any better than the paint does, so you're still going to have to use some sort of obnoxious type of paint to prime the surface. This is Mr. Colour, sorry, Mr. Paint that was on this. You're still going to need to do that to give these paints a chance to stay on the model. You're going to have to use some gloss coats to keep everything sealed up all the time, otherwise the slightest little spill or slip, you're going to knock your finish off. So they are still very fragile, but a lot of the other issues mitigated quite substantially actually. I haven't tested painting it with a paintbrush because I don't do that very much anyway, so I don't think I could really offer any insight into that. But hopefully that's been of some use to some of you. I've certainly found it a bit of an eye-opener, and yeah, I do think this is now a viable system, actually with its own thinner over primer, but especially using Mr. Colour lacquer thinner as a thinner. And on a final point to note with thinning it with Mr. Colour, you saw how it went a little bit weird and gloopy initially. Please, 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 if you're going to adopt that and try doing it that way yourself, test each colour. Don't assume that every single colour is going to mix the same, because again in the past I've had situations where I can use Mr. Colour in thinner in some colours, but other colours just won't have it and turn into an unusable sort of squidgy mess. So please, please, please mix the paint in a separate pot like I did here, and make sure it's going to work before you chuck it in your airbrush, because nobody needs to be trying to clean nasty acrylic slime goop out of their airbrush, trust me. And on that note, I'll leave it there. It only remains for me to say until next time, look after yourselves, look after each other, and Genesis out.